So let's start off in the source mixer here, which is where we can bring in all the oscillator types. We got a square and pulse wave, a sawtooth wave, a sub-octave oscillator, 1 octave down, 2 octaves down, and 2 octaves down pulse. And we've got a noise. And we can combine all 4 of these. For the range, we have 16 foot, 8 foot, 4 foot, and 2 foot. And in addition here, we have a transpose switch for the keyboard, so we can set it to low. And if we go back to 2 foot and set this to high, that is the maximum you can go. Next, we move on to the filter. We have a single low pass filter. Bit of resonance. We'll go back to these later. So let's move on to the envelope here. We have a single ADSR envelope. Currently I have it set in low attack, decay, and release with high sustain. But you can get a pad sound by increasing the attack and release. So there's different ways to trigger the envelope. You can do it either via LFO. You could do it via gate. And the gate is basically set on for when you hold down a key and off when you release the key. So this corresponds to the keyboard. And regardless of how many keys are down, the gate is always either 1 or 0. So if I press a key and then press another key, the gate remains 1 while they're both down. And only resets itself once all the keys are released. That's the difference between gate and this other gate/trigger. A trigger happens whenever a key is pressed down, any of the keys, even if another key is already pressed down. So for example, if I hold down this key and I press another note while the key is down, another trigger just got fired. So if I set it to gate plus trigger, this allows you to re-trigger the envelope even when you're playing legato, for example. And if I put it to gate, you'll notice it doesn't re-trigger unless I completely let go of the key. And jumping down here, we have a modulator, which is basically an LFO. Let's go over the functionality of the LFO. You have the rate, and you have a waveform. You have triangle, square, random, and then you have noise. This controls the amount of modulation that the LFO does to the filter. And similarly, we have a mod here for the VCO, so we can modulate the oscillator with the LFO. And just like you can modulate the filter with the LFO, you can also modulate it with the envelope via this slider here. Finally, the third modulation source for the VCF is keyboard, which maps to the keyboard, so the lower keys are low. And as you go up, it opens the filter. And going back to the oscillator here, if we set square wave, we have a pulse width modulation option. We can set it to either manually modulate, you can have the envelope modulated, in which case this knob controls the modulation amount. And finally, you can have LFO pulse width modulation. And finally here we have a fine-tune control. That basically covers this top portion here. So let's move down here to these buttons. We have a sequencer and an arpeggiator. Let's tackle the sequencer first. So the way it works is you press load, you play a few notes, and then you hit play. The rate of the sequencer is controlled by the LFO knob here, which is delimited as LFO/clock rate. The way to program rest and legato is as follows. You hit load the same way. You program your notes, and then where you want a rest, you press rest. In order to program legato, you play notes, and then you hold legato and press the next note, and that'll create a legato playing between those two notes. You can also transpose the sequencer by holding key transpose and pressing a different key while it's playing. Moving on to the arpeggiator, we have 3 modes: down, up, down, and up. You can also press this hold button here to hold the notes for you. And then similarly to how we did with the sequencer, you can transpose the arpeggiator once it's been held. And moving finally down to this section here, we have Portamento, which is currently off. We can turn it on and set the rate. This is the maximum. You can also set it to auto, which will only play Portamento when you're playing legato. So if I play notes like this, there's no Portamento, but if I play legato, we have Portamento. Finally, your standard main volume. And then here we have controls for this bender wheel here, which has two axes. You can either bend it this way or there's a little pressure tab when you push it forward. So the slider here controls the amount that the pressure will engage the LFO modulation on the VCO. It's basically vibrato. And then finally here we have these two controls to determine what the bending motion will do. You can either modulate the cutoff of the filter or the VCO. VCO is your standard pitch bend. And then you have the VCF control. And then you may have noticed this little attachment that I have here, which I haven't actually screwed on because I don't actually use this, but you can use this thing as a keytar, believe it or not, and hold it with a strap, in which case you hold this handle here with your hand and you have two controls here. It plugs in to these two jacks up here. You have a little pitch bend wheel and a little button here, which you can't see. The pitch bend wheel corresponds exactly to this, and the button corresponds to this pressure thing here. So similarly, we can have... And then if I push the button, I can engage vibrato. Again, I don't really use that, but if you were to use this as a keytar, you can do pitch bends with your left hand, as well as engage vibrato by pushing the button on the top. And finally, let's move on to the I/O section here. We have external clock input. So if you feed it a clock, whatever external clock is fed will synchronize the sequencer and the arpeggiator. So you can synchronize the SH-101 with other gear like drum machines or other synthesizers. Here you have a hold input, so you can plug in a pedal, which basically will simulate this hold button here. So you can push a button to hold down notes and lock a sequencer or an arpeggiator pattern or just a single note, because the hold works even without the arpeggiator or sequencer. Here we have CV and gate input and output. So you can use this keyboard to control a modular or other CV gate synthesizers. Or you can use the CV gate input to use another synthesizer or a MIDI to CV converter to use your computer to control the SH-101. And finally, we have headphones and a main output. So it's a fairly simple synthesizer on the surface, but where it lacks in complexity, it more than makes up for in great tone.